What is sin? Hi, I'm Mike Mason. This is the Immortal Combat Podcast. The Immortal Combat Podcast is a podcast arm of Very Christie. Very Christie is a Catholic lay apostolate devoted to help men attain the full stature of Christ by growing strong in mind, body, and spirit. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can check us out online at verychristie.com. All right, gentlemen, this is the Intro to Spiritual Theology, Episode 7. We are getting close to wrapping up our second part of a 6-part series on an introduction to the spiritual life. Remember, the spiritual life is all about the study of becoming saints, right? It's a science of saintliness. How do we grow in virtue, holiness, and become the men that God created us to be? Now, in month 1, we talked about the nature and end of man. What are we and where are we going? So we have to answer those questions to know why the advice God gives us to grow in holiness will work. This month, we're looking at sin and salvation. So the first week we talked about original justice. Last week we did original sin. This week we're going to talk about personal sin. And the next week, take a 30,000-foot view of salvation, just with some basic principles of how Christ liberates us from our sins. So, all right, that being said, let's just launch in. Okay, the last 2 weeks we talked about original justice and original sin. All right, in the garden, man has a perfect relationship with God. I shouldn't say perfect. Let's say a peaceful. Man is at peace with God, himself, and the world around him. Okay. So original sin messes that up. So in the garden, man has harmony between him and God. It says in the Bible that God would walk with man in the cool of the evening. After original sin, man loses sanctifying grace, and we start to prefer lower goods to God. Okay. That comes with original sin. So it throws a wrench in that relationship. About man and himself? Let's say man and his appetites. In the garden, our appetites were under control. Our appetites for food, drink, and sex, our fight and flight was all chill. Okay. Therefore we could think clearly and make good decisions. Right. Now, after original sin, our lower appetites are constantly trying to rule our reason and get it to do things it knows it shouldn't do. And again, all of us are probably painfully aware of that truth. What about man and his body? We used to have peace. No suffering, no death. Everything's good. After sin, suffering and death get entered in. That's the state of our existence now. How about man and creation? Right? We weren't going to get sick or anything. We had no problems with bacteria and viruses and all that sort of stuff. We had peace with the animal kingdom. Now there's disharmony in the natural order, big time. And we're all painfully aware of that. So this original justice in the garden has been thrown out with original sin. We are born into a condition where we're not at peace with God, not at peace with ourselves or the world around us. Okay. To make matters worse, till we get to the good news next week, we also suffered through committing personal sins. Now, be sure, original sin is not something you do. It's a condition you're born with. Adam and Eve did original sin. We are born into it. So babies born original sin, they're not guilty of something, okay? But they have inherited this problem from their parents, who got it from their parents, and so on and so forth. Personal sins, however, we are responsible for. So we're going to take a look at the nature of personal sin. And we're just going to go straight out of the catechism this week, okay? In the catechism, paragraphs 1846 through 1876, there's a good little section there on personal sin. Now, in paragraph 1849, catechism defines sin as an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. So sin makes us dumb. If you guys think about it, you've probably had this experience. When you think about the sins you commit, like, they're really dumb. Like, in the moment, it seems like a good idea. And then afterwards, you look back, like, wow, that's really dumb. Okay. The catechism says this: sin's dumb. Okay. Second, sin is a failure in genuine love for God. Well, there you go. We're failing to love him. We also are failing at genuine love of our neighbor because we have a perverse attachment to temporal goods. There's like certain goods we're attached to, and it's perverse because we're not doing the things we should be for God, our neighbor, or ourselves. Okay. So that's sin. Second part of sin, it's an offense against God. A lot of people are like, no, I sinned against my neighbor, myself, but not against God. All sins are sins against God. He's the source of everything good we have. So when we offend that good, we're offending him. Okay, the scriptures say, against you and you alone have I sinned and done that which is evil in your sight. And that's a passage out of scripture and also in the catechism, paragraph 1850. Now, the scriptures also say there's different kinds of sins. If you meet a Protestant, Protestants believe all sins are mortal, every one of them. Okay. And they cash that out in different ways, but they think it's mortal. We don't think that's true. The Catholic Church does not teach that. The Bible does not teach that. Okay. According to St. Paul in Galatians chapter 5, verse 19 through 21, there are lots of types of sin, and it'll lay them out for you. Okay. Sins, we believe, are rightly ordered according to how grave they are. So, how bad are they? Not all sins are equally bad. Okay. And the main distinction the church makes between gravity of sin is between mortal and venial sin. Now, mortal sin destroys charity and it destroys sanctifying grace. So let's say your parents get you baptized, you're good to go, you love Jesus, you commit a moral sin. It takes all the charity's gone, all the sanctifying grace is gone, all the merit, all the like the good works and things you did, that's gone in one moment because sin destroys, pardon me, mortal sin destroys our friendship with God and it takes everything away. Okay. Now, you can get it back through reconciliation, which we'll talk about more later. Okay. But it takes it all away. So if you're in a state of mortal sin here, fellas, you're not doing anything right now to get back to heaven. So get your butt to confession, get that taken care of. All right. The second type of sin is venial sin. Now, venial sins do not destroy sanctifying grace. They don't destroy charity, but they harm it. Okay. When a person's committing venial sins, especially intentionally venial, where you're just like, I know this is venial sin, but I'm just gonna do it anyways because I don't care. Okay, that starts messing with our ability to love God well. It's like a guy being married and choosing not to spend time with his wife, not to talk to her, not to take her on dates. Like that's not a recipe to move forward. Now, is that grounds for divorce or something? No, that's absurd. Okay. But this is not laying a good foundation. Okay. Now, there's venial sins never become mortal. So it's not like well, what if I did 100 venial sins? Would that equal one mortal sin? No. Mortal and venial sins are two different categories of sin. You don't move from one to another. Okay. However, deliberate, unrepented venial sin disposes us little by little to committing mortal sins. And unfortunately, probably all of us are familiar with this too, right? You're making bad decisions, but not like bad decisions. And then those bad decisions just start kind of disposing you or giving you this habit to then go down. Okay. That's what it means there. That's what the catechism is talking about. So we have to be very vigilant about venial sins. And I'll have more to say about that in future episodes. But before we wrap this week's lesson up, let's talk about what a mortal sin is. To commit a mortal sin, there's 3 conditions you have to meet. First, it's got to be grave matter. Okay, grave matter means the thing you're doing has to be a mortal sin. Now, the best place to find a list of mortal sins is the 10 commandments. Okay. Now, when you commit a mortal sins can be better, can be, there's gravity of sin even within mortal ones. So some mortal sins are worse than other mortal sins. Okay. Not every offense against the 10 commandments is a mortal sin. Okay. So for example, thou shalt not bear false witness, right? Well, you can do that by lying on the stand, which would be a mortal sin, or lying to someone about some sort of grave matter, that would be mortal sin. Or it can be a little white lie or something where it's venially sinful, but it's not mortal. Okay. So with the 10 commandments, it's a good summary of grave matter, but you still have to do some work like examining the gravity of the sin you're committing. Okay. Now, if you're unsure, the best, safest course of action, and I do this, just go to confessional booth and tell them. Say, yeah, I don't think this was mortal, but it was definitely venial. I definitely chose to do it. I shouldn't have done it, and I'm sorry. And then the priest he might respond and say, no, that actually is a mortal sin. So the safe route is always to confess it. Just be honest with the priest. He'll help you out. So now that's the first requirement. There's 2 more. Second requirement is what's called full knowledge. Full knowledge means you are aware of what you're doing. Okay. So you can't commit mortal sin out of complete ignorance. Okay. So if you are legitimately ignorant, right? And there's no way you could have found the right answer and you really don't know, that would not count as a mortal sin. Okay. To have sort of a silly example, let's say you go to mass on a Saturday morning just out of devotion. Okay. Like, I'm just going to go to mass. I think I want to go. And let's say Sunday morning you wake up, and because you went to Mass Saturday and you normally don't go Saturdays, you just have it in your head that it's Monday. And let's say it's the summertime, so you don't even have school. So you go through all of Sunday as if it's Monday, right? And you go through the whole day, okay? And you don't see anybody, you don't talk to somebody, something like that. And then all of a sudden, Monday shows up, and you run into somebody and say, "Where were you? Where were you? Why weren't you at Mass on Sunday?" And you're like, "What are you talking about? I was." Okay. That could be an example, could be, of not knowing what it is you're doing. Okay. And then in that case, you would be off the hook. Okay. Maybe it's not the best example in the world, but I think you guys get the gist. Now, not all ignorance gets you off the hook, because some ignorance is ignorance either that we are intentionally ignorant, like say you, I don't know, don't read the student handbook at school. And then you're like, I didn't know that was a rule. Okay. That kind of ignorance does not count, because that type of ignorance, you're causing the ignorance by not doing your due diligence. Second, there's some things that we should know, we just choose to ignore that lazy. That ignorance doesn't count. But there can be a type of ignorance that is. Again, if that question comes up on that, ask your priest in the confessional booth and he'll help you out. Okay. The third marker is complete consent. You do have to freely choose it. So if some strong man like physically forced you to pull a trigger on a gun and shoot somebody, you're not guilty of murder. Okay. Because you were merely an instrument there. You weren't choosing what you're doing wrong. We do need to choose what we when we act. Now, when it comes to knowledge and consent, these can be difficult questions, even with grave matter. Okay, so it has to be grave matter. You have to have full knowledge. You have to have complete consent. Most sins, most time you go to confession, these are really straightforward. Okay, but there are difficult cases, and there are good questions that are raised. We're not going to take time in this episode because I'm butting up near the end of our 12-minute mark, which I'm always shooting for. But if you go to our Intro to Moral Theology on YouTube, or if you go to our website, I have a whole month's worth on conscience that talks about how we know things, and then a whole month's worth on freedom. So there's 4 episodes for each that explore this in more detail. So you guys can check that out. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Walk away application. Keep practicing the rule of life, specifically this month, right? Examination of conscience. We have one online for you. Okay, get those resources. Do that examination every night. It takes 3 minutes. I do it with my wife and kids. It's a great way to end the day. And try to get to confession monthly. If it's been a long time since you've been there, get your butt in that booth. Okay, try to go monthly. That's a good habit to get into. But all right, we will stop there. We're a little bit over, but not too much. So I hope you guys have a blessed week. Hope this is helpful to you. Next week, we're going to take a 30,000 foot view of salvation, which should be a lot of fun. So next week's the good news. All right. Have a good one. God bless.